Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is JCK from Quantum Truths JCK, and I am continuing to read the first book of the Ringing Cedars series by Vladimir Megre, and that first book is Anastasia, and it's been translated by John Wordsworth from Russian into English. And we shall begin and continue our journey into this book. And this time I've remembered my background. But hopefully you're listening and not watching because this is an audiobook. But if you are watching, hello. So we'll start with chapter 19. Anastasia, chapter 19. The need to change one's outlook on the world. I asked Anastasia about the woman over whom she had a disagreement with, her grandfather. I asked her why she had been unable to establish a connection with her and why she thought this contact was necessary. You see, Anastasia began her story, it is very important when two people join their lives together that they have a spiritual attraction to each other. Unfortunately, everything basically starts with the carnal. For example, you see a beautiful girl and desire to be close to her. You still have not seen the individual, the man, or her soul. Very often people join their destinies together only on the basis of carnal attraction. Either that quickly passes or it is transferred to someone else. What then keeps people together? To find a kindred spirit with whom one can attain true happiness is not all that complicated. Your technocratic world, however, puts up massive interference. The woman I am trying to reach lives in a large city and regularly travels to the same place each day, probably to her work. Either there or on the way, she finds or meets up with a man who is very close to her spirit, one with whom she could be really happy, and most importantly, one with whom she could bear a child capable of bringing so much good into the world, because they would create this child with the same impulsion as we did. But there is no way this man can bring himself to tell this woman that he loves her. She herself is partly to blame for this. Just think. He looks into her face and sees, as it were, his heart's desire, the apple of his eye, while she, as soon as she feels someone's gaze upon her, perks up right away and unwittingly tries to lift her skirt higher and so on. This man is at once carnally aroused, but he does not know her well, and so he then goes to someone he is better acquainted with, someone he feels more accessible, but still led on by these same carnal desires. I want to suggest to this woman what she should do, but I cannot break through to her. Her brain will not open to the awareness of new information, even for a second. It is constantly preoccupied with issues of day-to-day living. Can you imagine? One time I followed her for a whole 24 hours. What a terrible sight. Grandfather then got upset with me for not working enough with the Dashniks and for spreading myself too thin and sticking my nose in where it does not belong. When this woman wakes in the morning, her first thought is not to delight in the coming day, but how to prepare something to eat. She gets upset over some missing food item and then gets upset over something you smear on your face in the morning, like face cream or rouge. She spends her whole time thinking how she is going to get it. She's always late and is constantly on the run, trying not to miss first one form of transport and then the next. At her regular destination, her brain is overloaded with, how shall I put it, all sorts of nonsense, at least from my point of view. On the other hand, it is supposed to give her face a business-like expression and fulfill the job tasks she is assigned. All this while she's thinking about one of her girlfriends or acquaintances and getting angry at them. At the same time, she is listening to everything going on around her. And can you imagine the same routine is repeated day after day like clockwork? On her way home, when people notice her, she can put on the appearance of an almost happy woman, but she's continually thinking about problems or her makeup or looking at clothes in the shop windows. Above all, clothes that will expose her alluring charms, supposing that this will result in some kind of miracle. Except in her case, everything happens the wrong way around. She gets home and starts house cleaning. She thinks she's relaxing when she watches her television and prepares her meals, but the main thing is she thinks about good things only for a split second. Even when she goes to bed, she's still mulling over her daily cares and stays in the same mental rut. If only she could turn away from her thoughts, even just for a moment during the day, and think of, wait, Anastasia, explain specifically how you see her, her outward appearance and clothing, and tell me what she should be thinking about at that moment when this man is with her. What should she do to make him at least attempt to tell her he loves her? Anastasia explained everything in the minutest detail. I shall only mention here what I consider to be the most important points. Her dress should come to just below the knee. It should be green with a white collar and no cleavage. She should wear hardly any makeup and listen with interest to the person talking to her. And that's it? I remarked upon hearing such a simple explanation, to which Anastasia remarked, "There is so much underlying these simple instructions. In order for her to choose that particular dress, change her makeup, and look at that person with genuine interest, she will have to change her whole outlook on the world." End of chapter 19. Chapter 20. A Mortal Sin. I still need to tell you, Vladimir, about the terms under which you will receive money in the bank, when there will be a great deal of money in your accounts. Go ahead, Anastasia. It will be a pleasant experience, I replied. However, I was devastated by what I heard. Judge for yourselves. Here is what she set forth. In order to withdraw the money from your bank account, you must meet the following conditions. First of all, for 3 days before receiving it, you must not drink anything alcoholic. When you arrive at the bank, the manager must verify, with the help of the devices you have, your compliance with this condition in the presence of not less than 2 witnesses. If this first condition is met, you may then proceed to carry out the second. You must do no less than 9 deep knee bends in front of the bank manager and the 2 witnesses present. When the significance, or rather the absurdity, of her words finally sunk in, I jumped up, and she stood up as well. I couldn't believe my ears and counted. First, they're going to check my alcohol content, and then I am to do at least 9 deep knee bends like this. Is that it? Yes, responded Anastasia. And for each knee bend, they will be able to release from your account no more than 1 million of your rubles at their present worth. I was overwhelmed by a sense of rage, anger, and annoyance. What did you say that for? What for? I was feeling so good. I believed you. I was starting to think that you were right about a lot of things, that there was logic to your arguments, but now I am absolutely convinced that you're schizophrenic, a stupid hick, a mad woman. This latest thing you said has wiped out everything else. It's completely devoid of any sense or logic. That's not just my opinion. Any sane person will agree with me. Ha! Don't tell me you still want me to write out these conditions in your book. Yes. Now you've really gone mad. You've really gone mad. Do you mean to tell me you were planning to write out instructions to the banks or publish this order? No, they will read it in the book and they will act accordingly with you. Otherwise, they can expect to go bankrupt. Oh my God. And I've been listening to this creature 3 days already. Don't tell me you would like the bank manager to do knee bends with me too, in the presence of witnesses. Well, it would be good for him, as it will be for you, but for them I have not set such strict conditions as I have for you. So you're only doing this for my benefit? Do you have the slightest idea what a mockery you've made of me? See what the love of a crazy recluse can spill over into? Only it won't work. Not one single bank will ever agree to serve me under those conditions, no matter how much you have visualized such a situation. In your dreams, hey? Well, you can stand there here and do all the deep knee bends you want, you nincompoop. The banks will agree, and whether you know it or not, will open accounts for you. Granted, only those banks which are willing to operate ethically, and people would trust them and come to them. Anastasia went on, not budging an inch from her position. I found myself becoming increasingly irritated and angry. Angry with myself or angry at Anastasia. Come on now, think how long I've listened to her, trying to understand what she's saying, and here she's turned out to be simply half crazy. I started laying into her, using, to put it mildly, some pretty coarse language. She stood there, leaning back to a tree, her head just slightly bowed. One hand was clasped to her chest, and the other was raised upward, slightly waving. I recognized that gesture. She used it every time she needed to bring calm to the surrounding natural environment so I wouldn't get fearful of it. And I realized why she needed to calm them down on this occasion. Every insulting or coarse word directed at Anastasia felt like a whip cracking against her flesh, making her whole body tremble. I fell silent. I sat down again on the grass, turned away from Anastasia, deciding I'd better calm down myself and head back to the river bank and not talk with her any more at all. But when I heard her voice call out behind me, I was amazed that it didn't have the slightest hint of resentment or rebuke. You know, Vladimir, everything bad that happens to man is brought on by man himself. Whenever he disobeys the laws of spiritual being and breaks his connection with nature, the forces of darkness try to distract their attention with the instant attraction of your technocratic way of life to make them forget the simple truths and commandments set forth way back in the Bible. And they all too often succeed. One of the mortal sins of man is pride. Most people are subject to this sin. I shall not at the moment go into all the terrible, disastrous effects it produces. After you return home and try to make sense of it, you will understand, either on your own or through the help of enlightened individuals who come to see you. But for now, I shall just say this. The forces of darkness, which are diametrically opposed to the forces of light, are every moment working to make sure man does not let go of this sin. And money is one of their basic tools in this campaign. They were the ones that thought up this concept of money. Money is like a high tension zone. The forces of darkness are proud of this invention. They even think themselves stronger than the forces of light for having come up with money and for being able to use money to distract people from their true purpose. This great confrontation has lasted for millennia. and man is at its center. But I do not want you to be enslaved to this sin. I realize that mere explanations are not enough to settle this question, because in spite of thousands of years of explanations, mankind has not understood nor discovered the means of counteracting this sin. It is only natural that you would not be able to discover it either. But I really very much want to save you from this mortal danger which can corrupt the spirit. That is why I thought up a special situation just for you. One that would cause this device of the forces of darkness to be broken or fail, or even work the opposite way for the extermination of the sin. That is why they have become so enraged. Their anger has been implanted in you, and you, for your part, started shouting your insults at me. They wanted to make me angry at you in return, but I will never do that. I realized that what I thought up would hit the mark precisely, and now it is clear that their system, which has worked flawlessly for thousands of years, can indeed be broken. Right now, I have done this only for you, but I shall think up something for other people too. Now that what harm is there in drinking less of that alcoholic poison and in becoming less arrogant and stubborn? What were you so upset over? Of course, it was pride that was upsetting you. She fell silent, and I thought, improbable as it is, her brain, or something besides, may have put into this comic, utterly abnormal situation of doing deep knee bends in a bank such a deep meaningfulness that there really could be some logic in it. I'd better think about this a little more calmly. All my anger at Anastasia passed, and in its place arose a feeling of uneasy guilt. However, instead of apologizing on the spot, I simply turned to her with a desire for reconciliation. Anastasia, it turned out, felt my inner state. She at once gave a joyful shudder all over and began talking at top speed. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21. Touching Paradise. Your brain is tired of listening to me, and yet I still have so much I want to tell you. I do so want to, but you need to rest. Let us sit again for a little while. We sat down on the grass. Anastasia took me by the shoulders and drew me close to her. The back of my head touched her breasts, which gave me a pleasant, warm feeling. Do not be afraid of me. Let yourself go, she quietly said, and lay down on the grass so that it would be more comfortable for me to rest. She ran the fingers of one of her hands through my hair, as if combing them, while the fingertips of her other hand quickly touched my forehead and temples. Occasionally, she would lightly press down with her fingernails at various points on the top of my head. All this gave me a feeling of tranquility and enlightenment. Then, putting her hands on my shoulders, Anastasia said, "Listen now, and please tell me what sounds you hear around you." I listened, and my hearing caught a wide range of sounds, all different in tonality, rhythm, and continuity. I began naming the sounds aloud: the birds singing in the trees, the chirping and clicking of insects in the grass, the rustle of the leaves, the fluttering and flapping of birds' wings. I named everything I could hear, then fell silent and went on listening. This was pleasant and very interesting for me. You have not named everything, Anastasia observed. Everything, I replied. Well, maybe I left out something not very significant or something I didn't catch. Not anything important, that is. Vladimir, do you not hear how my heart is beating? Asked Anastasia. Could I really have not been paying attention to this sound? The sound of her heart beating? Yes, I hastened to respond. Of course I hear it. I hear it very well. It is beating evenly and calmly. Try to memorize the intervals of the various sounds you hear. You can choose the principal sounds and memorize them. I selected the chirping of some insect, the cawing of a crow, and the gurgling and splash of the water in the stream. Now, I shall increase the tempo of my heartbeat, and you listen to see what happens all around. Anastasia's heartbeat increased in frequency, and right away, the rhythm of sounds I could hear around me joined in with a heightened tonality. Oh, that's astounding. Simply incredible, I exclaimed. What are you saying, Anastasia? Are they so sensitive to the rhythm of your heartbeat? Yes, everything. Absolutely everything. A little blade of grass, a big tree, even the bugs, they all react to any change in the rhythm of my heart. The trees accelerate their inner processes and work harder to produce oxygen. Is this how all the plants and animals in people's environment react? I asked. No, in your world, they do not understand to whom they should react. And you do not try to make contact with them. Besides, you do not understand the purpose of such contact and do not give them sufficient information about yourself. Something similar might happen between plants and the people who work on their little garden plots. If only people would do everything I outlined to you, imbue the seed with information about themselves and begin to communicate more consciously with their plants. Do you want me to show you what man will feel when he makes such contact? Of course I want you to, but how will you do that? I shall tune the rhythm of my heartbeat to yours and you will feel it. She slid her hand inside my shirt, her warm palm lightly pressed against my chest. Little by little, her heart adjusted its tuning and began beating in the same rhythm as mine. And something most amazing happened. I felt an unusually pleasant sensation, as though my mother and my relatives were right there beside me. A sense of softness and good health came over my body, and my heart was filled with joy, freedom, and a whole new sense of creation. The range of surrounding sounds caressed me and communicated the truth. Not a truth comprehensible in all its detail, just something I felt intuitively. I had the impression that all the pleasing and joyous feelings I had ever experienced in my life were now merging into a single and wonderful sensation. Perhaps it is this sensation that is called happiness. But as soon as Anastasia began to change the rhythm of her heartbeat, the wonderful sensation started to leave me. I asked, more, please let me feel it more, some more, Anastasia. I cannot do that for long. After all, I have my own rhythm. Even just a little bit more, I pleaded. And once again, Anastasia brought back the sensation of happiness just for a short time, and then everything faded. but not without leaving me with a small taste of the pleasant and radiant sensation as a memory of it. We remained silent for a while, and then I felt like hearing Anastasia's voice again, and I asked, "Was it this good for the first people, Adam and Eve? You just lie around, enjoy life and prosper, everything at hand? Only it can become boring if there's nothing to do." Instead of answering my question, Anastasia asked one of her own, "Tell me, Vladimir, do many people think of Adam, the first man, as you thought just now?" "Probably the majority. But what was there for them to do in paradise? It was only later that man started to develop and thought up everything. Man developed through labor. He became smarter thanks to labor. Yes, labor is needful. But the first man was infinitely smarter than his descendants today. And his labor was more meaningful. It demanded considerable intelligence, awareness, and will. But what did Adam do in paradise? Did he tend to a garden? That is something that can be done today by any gardener, not to mention plant breeding specialists. Nothing more is said in the Bible about Adam's activity. If the Bible told everything in detail, it would be impossible to read through it in a single human lifetime. One must understand the Bible. There is so much information behind each verse. Do you want to know what Adam did? I shall tell you. But first, remember that it is the Bible that tells us that God assigned Adam to give names and specify the purpose of every creature living on the earth. And he, Adam, did this. He did what all the scientific institutions in the world taken together have not yet been able to do. Anastasia, do you turn to God yourself? Do you ask him for anything for yourself? What more can I ask when so much has already been given me? It is my task to thank him and help him. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22. Who will bring up our son? On the way back to the river, as Anastasia was escorting me to my motorboat, we sat down to rest in the place where she had left her outer clothing, and I asked her, "Anastasia, how will we bring up our son?" "Try to understand, Vladimir. You are not yet ready to bring him up. And when his eyes first take in a conscious awareness of the world, you should not be there." I seized her by the shoulders and gave her a shaking. "What are you saying? What liberties are you taking here? I can't understand how you could have come to such one-sided conclusions. Anyway, even though the mere fact of your existence is incredible, that doesn't give you the right to decide everything for yourself and in violation of all the rules of logic. Calm down, Vladimir, please. I do not know what logic you have in mind, but do try and make sense of it calmly." "What am I to make sense of? The child is not only yours, he's mine too, and I want him to have a father. I want him to be well taken care of and get an education. Please understand, he does not need any kind of material benefits as you see them. He will have everything he needs right from the start, even in his infancy. He will be taking in and making sense of so much information that your kind of education will be simply ludicrous. It's the same as sending a learned mathematician back to grade 1. You want to bring the baby some kind of senseless toy, but he has absolutely no need of it whatsoever. You are the one who needs it for your own self-satisfaction. Oh, look at me. I'm so good and caring. If you think that you will do some good by offering your son a car or anything else along the line, well, he can get it himself just by wishing for it. Be calm and think about something specific you could tell your son. Think about what you could teach him. Think about what you have done in your life that he might find interesting. Anastasia continued talking in soft, quiet tones, but her words still made me tremble. You see, Vladimir, when he begins to make sense of creation, you will look like an underdeveloped creature next to him. Do you really want that? Do you really want your son to see you standing there like a dimwit? The only thing that can bring the two of you together is your level of mental purity. But few attain that level in your world. You must strive to attain it. I realized that it was absolutely useless to argue with her, and I cried out in despair. Does that mean he'll never know anything about me? I shall tell him about you, about your world, when he is able to comprehend it in a meaningful way and make his own decisions. What he will do then, I do not know. Despair, pain, resentment, fearful conjecture, all these swirled around in my brain. I felt like smashing this beautiful intellectual recluse's face with all my might. I understood everything, and what I understood left me breathless. It's all clear. Now it's all clear to me. You had nobody to bang with to give you a child. That business at the beginning, that was all an act. You sly vixen, you made yourself into a nun. You needed a child, but you did go to Moscow. She sold her mushrooms and berries. Ha! You could have got yourself a shag there, right on the street. All you had to do was take off that jacket and shawl of yours, and you would have had your takers right off. Then you wouldn't have needed to spin your web and trap me in it. Of course, you needed a man who was dreaming about a son, and you've got yours. Did you ever think about the child? About your son? One destined to advance to live the life of a recluse, to live the way you think he should? Come on now. Here she's been sounding off about the truth. You've got an awful lot of gall, you hermit. What is it with you? Truth as a last resort? Well, did you ever think about me? Me. I dreamt about a son. I dreamt about passing along my business to him. I'd teach him to be a businessman. I wanted a son to love. And now, how am I supposed to live? To live and know that your precious little son is crawling around unprotected somewhere out in the wilds of the taiga, with no future, with no father. That's what breaks my heart. But that's not something you can understand, you forest bitch. Perhaps, Anastasia quietly responded. Your heart will gain the awareness it needs and everything will be all right. A pain like that will cleanse the soul, accelerate thought, and summon you to creation. But I was still burning with rage and anger. I wasn't in control of myself. I grabbed a stick. I ran away from Anastasia and began beating the stick against a small tree with all my might until the stick broke. And then I turned to look at Anastasia standing there, and oh, how she appeared to me. Incredibly, the anger started to leave. I thought to myself, oh, now I've gone and done it again. I lost control of myself and went wild, just like the last time when I swore at her. Anastasia was standing there against a tree, one arm stretched upward, her head bent forward, as though withstanding the onslaught of a hurricane. With my anger completely gone, I went closer and began looking at her. Now her hands were clasped to her chest, her body slightly trembling. She didn't speak. Only her kind eyes were looking at me with the same tenderness as before. We stood there that way for some time, just looking at each other. And I started reflecting along these lines. There's no doubt about it. She is incapable of lying. She didn't have to say anything, but she knew it would be hard, and yet she spoke. Of course, that too is a challenge. How can you possibly live if you must always tell the truth and say only what you think? But what can you do if that's the way she is and can't be anything else? What's done is done. Everything happened the way it happened. Now she will be the mother of my son. She will be a mother if she said so. Of course, she'll be a pretty strange mother. That lifestyle of hers and her way of thinking. Oh, well, there's nothing to be done with her. Still, she's physically strong and kind. She really knows nature well, knows the animals, and she's smart, in her own peculiar way at least. In any case, she knows a lot about raising children. She kept wanting to talk about children the whole time. She'll nurture the boy. Somebody like her will definitely nurture him. She'll get him through the cold, through snowstorms even. They mean nothing to her. She'll nurture him, yes, indeed, and she'll bring him up right. And somehow I've got to adapt to the situation. I'll come and see them in the summertime, like going to a dasha. No way in the winter. I wouldn't make it. But in the summer, I can play with my son. He'll grow up and I'll tell him about people in big cities. At any rate, this time I've got to apologize to her. And I said, I'm sorry, Anastasia. I got nervous again. And right off, she said, you are not to blame. Only do not be hard on yourself. Do not worry. After all, you were concerned about your son. You were afraid that things would turn out bad for him, that the mother of your son was just an ordinary bitch, that she could not love with real human love. But you must not worry. You must not get upset. You talked that way because you did not know. You did not know anything about my love, my darling. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23. Through a window of time. Anastasia, if you are so smart and omnipotent, that means you could help me? She looked up at the sky and then again at me. In the whole of the universe, there is no being capable of more powerful development and greater freedom than man. All other civilizations bow before man. All sorts of civilizations have the capability of developing and bringing themselves to perfection, but only in one direction. They are not free. Even the greatness of man is beyond their grasp. God, the great mind, created man, and to no one else gave he more than to man. I could not make sense, at least right off, of what she was saying. And again, I uttered the same question, pleading for help, not fully understanding what kind of help I needed. She asked me, what is it that you have in mind? Do you want me to cure all your physical ailments? That is a simple matter for me. I already did this 6 months ago. Only in the principal area of need no benefit came about. The dark and destructive elements common to people of your world have not lessened in you, and your various aches and pains are trying to come back again. You witch, madwoman, hermit, get out of here this instant, you're probably thinking, right? Yes, I answered in amazement. That is exactly what I was thinking. You read my mind. I surmise that that is what you might be thinking. Indeed, it is written all over your face. Tell me, Vladimir, do you not, well, remember me, at least a little? The question dumbfounded me, and I began carefully examining her facial features, especially her eyes. I really began to think that I might have seen them somewhere before, but where? Anastasia, you said yourself that you spend all your time in the forest. How then could I have seen you? She gave me a smile and ran off. A short while later, Anastasia came out from behind the bushes dressed in a long skirt, a brown buttoned cardigan, hair done up in a shawl, but without the quilted jacket in which she had greeted me on the river bank, and the shawl was tied differently. Her clothes were clean, though not stylish, and her shawl covered her forehead and neck. And I remembered her. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24. A Strange Girl. The summer before, our convoy ship had docked at one of the villages not far from these parts. We needed to buy bulk meat for the restaurant and spend some time in port. 60 kilometers farther on there would be a particularly dangerous section of the river, which meant our ship could not travel through there at night. Certain sections of the river were not equipped with navigation lights. So, as not to waste time, we began announcing over our outdoor loudspeaker system, as well as the local radio, that we were throwing a party that evening aboard our vessel. The sleek white ship standing at the dock, glistening with a huge array of lights and alive with the music pouring forth from it, inevitably attracted the young people of the village to such occasions. Indeed, on this particular evening, practically the entire local youth population could be seen making its way to the ship's gangplank. Upon coming aboard, like any first-time visitors, they immediately set about taking a look around the whole ship to see what they could see. After touring the main, middle, and upper decks, they ended up congregating in the restaurant and bar. The female contingent, as a rule, took to dancing, while the male half preferred drinking. The unusual circumstance of being on a ship, plus the music and alcohol, always engendered a state of excitement, occasionally making big trouble for the crew. Almost always there was not enough time, and the party-goers made a collective appeal to extend the festivities just a bit longer, say by half an hour, and then more and more into the night. On this particular occasion, I was alone in my cabin, listening to the music wafting up from the restaurant and attempting to make modifications to the convoy schedule for the remainder of the trip. All at once, I felt myself being stared at. I turned around and glimpsed her eyes on the other side of the window glass. That was nothing unusual. Visitors often liked looking into the ship's cabins. I got up and opened the window. She didn't go away. She continued looking at me with some embarrassment. I felt I wanted to do something for this woman standing alone on the deck just outside my cabin. I wondered why she wasn't dancing like the others. Perhaps she was somehow unhappy. I offered to show her around the ship, and she silently nodded. I took her all over the ship, showed her the main office, which frequently impressed visitors with its elegant appointments. the rug covering the floor, the soft leather furniture, the computers. Then I invited her into my cabin, which consisted of a study cum sleeping quarters and a carpeted reception room equipped with fine furniture, TV, and VCR. It was probably most I was probably most delighted at the time to impress a poor country girl with the achievements of our civilized world. I opened in front of her a box of candies, poured 2 glasses of champagne, and thinking to add the finishing touches to the impression, put on a videotape of Vika Tsiganova singing Love and Death, Lyubov i Smert. The videotape included a number of other songs performed by my favorite artists. She lightly touched the champagne glass to her lips, looked intently at me, and asked, "It's a challenge, eh?" I expected just about any kind of question except that one. The expedition had indeed turned out to be quite a challenge. What with the difficult navigation conditions on the river and the crew, mainly students from the Marine Academy, smoking pot and pilfering merchandise from the store. We were frequently behind schedule and couldn't get to our planned stops on time, where our arrival had been advertised in advance. These burdens and other worries often deprived me of the opportunity not only to admire the landscape along the river, but even to get a normal sleep. I muttered something meaningless to her, something like, "Never mind, we'll get through," then turned toward the window and polished off my glass of champagne. We went on talking about this, that, or the other, listening to the videotape in the background. We talked right up until the ship docked once more at the end of the party cruise. Then I escorted her to the gangplank. Upon returning to my cabin, I made a mental note. There was something very strange and unusual about this woman, and I was left with an unexpected feeling of lightness and brightness after talking with her. That night, I had my first good sleep in many days. At long last, I understood why. The woman on the ship had been Anastasia. "So that was you, Anastasia?" "Yes. There, in your cabin. I memorized all the songs which I later sang to you in the forest. They were playing while we were talking. You see how simple it all is? How did you happen to come on board?" "I was interested in seeing what was going on, how you all lived. After all, Vladimir, I had been spending my whole time just taking care of Dashniks. That day I had hurried to the village. I sold the dried mushrooms which the squirrels had collected, and I bought a ticket to your party cruise. Now I know a lot more about the class of people you call entrepreneurs, and I know you pretty well too. I feel I owe you a huge apology. I did not know how things would turn out, that I would be so drastically altering your future. Only I can no longer do anything about it, since they have seen to the fulfillment of this plan, and they are answerable only to God. For a time now, you and your family will have great difficulties and challenges to overcome, but then that will all pass." Still not understanding what Anastasia was specifically talking about, I intuitively felt that something was about to unfold itself to me that would go way beyond the usual parameters of our existence, something directly concerning me. I asked Anastasia to tell me in more detail what she meant by altering my destiny and challenges. Listening to her at the time, I simply could not imagine how accurately her predictions would soon start being realized in real life. She continued her recounting once more, bringing me back to events of the past year. "Back then, on the ship," she said, "you showed me everything, even your cabin, treated me to candies, offered me champagne, and then you escorted me to the gangplank. But I did not leave the river bank right away. I stood on the shore near some bushes, and I could see through the lighted windows of the bar how the young people of the village were still dancing and having a good time. You showed me everything, but you did not take me to the bar. I guessed why. I was not appropriately dressed. My head was covered in a shawl. My cardigan was not stylish. My skirt was too long. But I could take off the shawl. My cardigan was neat and clean, and I had pressed my skirt carefully with my hands before I came to see you. I really hadn't taken Anastasia to the bar that evening on account of her rather strange clothes, beneath which, as it was now clear, this young girl had been hiding her remarkable beauty, something that immediately set her apart from everyone else. And I said to her, Anastasia, why would you have wanted to go to the bar? Do you mean you would have gone dancing there in your galoshes? Anyway, how would you know what dances young people do today? I was not wearing galoshes at the time. When I exchanged my mushrooms for money to buy a ticket to your ship, I also bought a pair of shoes from the same woman. Granted, they were old shoes and were tight on me, but I cleaned them with grass. As for dancing, all I would need is a one-time look, and that would be it. And what a dancer I'd be. You were, I suppose, offended at me that night? I was not offended, but if you had taken me to the bar, I do not know whether that would have been a good or a bad thing. But events might have turned out differently, and all this might not have happened. But I do not now regret that things happened the way they did. So, what happened? What happened that night that was so terrible? After you escorted me off the ship, you did not return right away to your cabin. First, you dropped in to see the captain, and then the two of you headed for the bar. For you, that was a normal thing to do. The moment you entered, you both made an impression on the public. The captain looked prim and proper in his uniform. You were very elegant and gave a more respectable appearance. You were known to many in this village, a famous Maigret, the owner of a convoy of ships unique in these parts, and you fully realized that you were making an impression. You sat down at a table with three young country girls. They were all only 18 years old, just out of school. And the waiters immediately brought champagne and candies and new wine glasses to your table, prettier than the ones that were there before. You took one of the girls by the hand, bent over, and started whispering something in her ear. Compliments. I understand they are called. Then you danced with her several times, and the conversation continued. The girl's eyes were radiant as if she were in another world, a fairy tale world. You took the girl out on deck and gave her a tour of the ship, just as you had me. You took her into your cabin and treated her to champagne and candies, just like me. But there was something a little different in the way you behaved with this young girl. You were in a cheerful mood. With me, you were serious and even morose. But with her, you were cheerful. I could see all that very well through the lighted window of your cabin. And possibly I felt a little as though I wanted to be there in the place of that girl. You don't mean to tell me you were jealous, Anastasia? I do not know. It was somehow an unfamiliar feeling for me. I recalled that evening and these young country girls who were trying so hard to look older and more modern. The next morning, Captain Sanchenko and I once again had a laugh at their nighttime antics on the dock. Then in my cabin, I realized that this girl was in such a state that she was ready to go to any lengths, but I didn't have any thought about wanting to possess her. I told Anastasia about this, and she replied, "Still, you had stolen her heart. The two of you went out on deck. It was drizzling, and you threw your jacket over the girl's shoulders. Then you took her back to the bar." "What were you doing, Anastasia? Standing there the whole time in the bushes in the rain?" "That was nothing. The drizzle was good and caressing, only it interfered with my view, and I did not want my skirt and shawl to get wet. They were my mother's. My mother left them to me. But I was very lucky. I found a cellophane bag on the shore and took off my skirt and shawl and put them in the bag and hid it under my cardigan. Anastasia, if you didn't go home and it started to rain, you should have come back to the ship." "I could not have done that. You had already seen me off, and you had other concerns. Besides, everything was shutting down. When the party came to an end and the ship was due to depart at the girl's request, especially the girl who was with you in your cabin, you delayed the departure. At that point, everything was in your power, including their hearts, and you were intoxicated with this power. The young people of the village were grateful to the girls, and the girls too felt imbued with a sense of power through you. They completely forgot about the young lads who were with them in the bar, guys they had been friends with in school. You and the captain escorted them to the gangplank. Then you went back to your cabin. The captain went up to the bridge, and then the signal sounded, and the ship slowly, very slowly began to pull away from the dock. The girl you had danced with stood on the shore beside her girlfriends and the young people who had waited around to see the ship off. Her heart was beating so strongly it was almost trying to leap out of her breast and fly away. Her thoughts and feelings were all mixed up. Behind her back could be seen the outlines of the village houses with their darkened shadows, while in front of her the sleek white steamship was departing forever, illuminated with a host of lights, still abundantly pouring forth its music across the water and the nighttime riverbank. The sleek white ship was where you were after saying so many marvelous things to her she had never heard before, so charming and alluring. And all that was slowly distancing itself from her forever. Then she decided to do something in the sight of everyone. She squeezed her fingers into a fist and began shouting desperately, "I love you, Vladimir!" And she did it again and again. Did you hear her shouting? "Yes," I replied. "You could not help hearing her, and members of your crew heard her too. Some of them went out on deck and began laughing at the girl. I did not want them to laugh at the girl. Then they stopped laughing, as if they had suddenly come to their senses. But you did not come out on deck, and the ship continued slowly moving away. She thought you could not hear her, and she continued stubbornly crying out, 'I love you, Vladimir.' Then some of her girlfriends joined in, and they all cried out together. I wondered what that feeling was like. Love, which makes people lose control of themselves. Or perhaps I wanted to help that girl, and so I shouted with them, 'I love you, Vladimir.' It seemed as though I had forgotten at that moment that it was not enough just to simply utter words. There definitely had to be behind them feelings, an awareness, a trustworthiness of natural information. Now I know how strong that feeling is, and it is hardly subject to reason. The country girl later began to go into a slump and take to the bottle. And it was a challenge for me to help her. Now she's married and burdened down with everyday cares. And I have had to add her love to mine. The story of the girl threw me a little off balance. Anastasia's account managed to resurrect that evening in my memory in full detail, and everything had really happened just as she said. It was very real. Anastasia's unique declaration of love did not make any impression on me. After seeing her lifestyle and getting to know how she looked at the world, I saw her more and more as some unreal personage, even though she was sitting right beside me, and I could simply reach out my hand and touch her. A consciousness accustomed to judge things by other criteria could not accept her as an existing reality. And while at the beginning of our encounter I had been attracted to her, she no longer aroused in me the emotions I once had. I asked, "So you think these new feelings appeared in you just by chance?" "They are desirable. They are important," replied Anastasia. "They are pleasant even. But I wanted you to love me too. I realized that once you got to know me and my little world a little more closely, you would not be able to accept me as a normal person, as simply man. Perhaps you would even be afraid of me occasionally." And that is exactly what happened. I myself am to blame. I have made many mistakes. I was anxious for some reason all the time. I was in a hurry, and I did not have the time to explain everything to you as I should. Perhaps it all just turned out silly, hey? Do I need to reform myself? And with those words, her lips hinted at a sad smile. She touched her breast with her hand, and I at once remembered what had happened that morning when I was in the glade with Anastasia. End of chapter 24.